everyone. Welcome to the VO Boss Podcast. I'm your host, Ann Ganguza, and today I am so excited to have two very special guests on the show. Welcome Landon Beach, author of the psychological thriller Narrator, which is available now wherever fine books are sold. Landon previously served as a naval officer and was an educator for 15 years before becoming a full-time writer with 6 titles, the latest being Narrator. Welcome, Landon.
Hey, Anne. Thanks for having me on.
We also have the actual narrator of the book Narrator and award-winning narrator who has more than 800 books to his name. Maybe there's more by now. 600 earphone awards, a Voice Arts Legacy Award, a Grammy nomination. Welcome, Scott Brick, to the show.
Hey. It's so good to see you all.
I know, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to talk to you today about this book, which is amazing, bosses. So if you don't mind, I'd like to start with just a little bit of a preview. If you don't mind, I'm going to play this, and hopefully you guys will be able to hear it. Here we go.
Why do authors have to kill off characters we love? I, Sean Frost, sit in my darkened recording booth and stare at the final paragraph of the novel I am narrating. Almost there. Finish it. Finish it right. Finish it with a flourish. But I can't. Not right now. For I am crying. The main character, Nehemiah Stone, died 2 pages ago in a self-sacrifice that I had not seen coming. The book, The Paris Sanction, is author M. Scott Sala's 4th Nehemiah Stone thriller, which I have waited patiently for 2 years for the chance to narrate. 5 years ago, Simon & Schuster thought I was the perfect narrator for the job when they contacted my agent, David Killian, whom I affectionately refer to as Killy.
I would love to play all of that, but I'm going to leave the bosses in suspense. Wow. So you guys, this is, for me, I mean, having read the book and listened to the audiobook as well, it's amazing. And so I'd love to talk to you about the process. So let's start with you, Landon. After being an educator, thank you very much. And for your service, thank you. What was your thought process in becoming a writer?
Well, I've always written ever since I was young, and I had a wonderful English teacher in high school who really encouraged me. And then it kind of went away for a while. As you said, I went off and served. But I don't think I ever lost the passion for reading or the itch. And so fast forward many years later, and Scott and I started working together and developed a friendship. And I had an idea that I had been tossing around in my mind for 20 years because I've always loved the entertainment industry, love to watch movies and study film. And finally, it came to me one day after Scott and I had finished, I think, 3 books together. I thought, I think I have a way to tell an entertainment comeback story that has never been done before. With an audiobook narrator as the main character set within the framework of a psychological thriller. So that's where the idea came together. It wasn't until I started working with Scott and got to know a little bit about the audiobook world before I saw the opportunity that was in front of me. And then I shoved all other books to the side and just immersed myself in that world. And here we are today.
So I guess I should ask you then, how did you find Scott? So then Scott kind of contributed to the idea of the book for Narrator after you had worked with him?
He did not contribute to the idea at all. I shocked the heck out of him when I presented it to him. Yes. Now, after that, yes, he was very helpful and had so much, generous feedback. And, the book, whatever success it may have is in large part, of course, not only to his narration, but just his extreme, kindness and professionalism, talking about the industry and seeing what worked and what wouldn't work in the book. And if we were going to break some rules, to knowingly break them so that it would be authentic and that the research would be impeccable, so that not only the common fan, for 99% of them, would not know where we're bending the rules or not, but it was important to us for maybe the 1%, the people that are in the industry that Scott and I both love, would appreciate the nods and winks and the Easter eggs and just
Oh,
the fun
yeah.
of it, that it hadn't been done before. So in terms of how I found Scott, I had placed in a few writing competitions for my first two novels, and I had written a third novel, and I was discussing with my wife how we might expand the business, and audiobooks were exploding back then and
Mm.
continue to explode now, but this is around 2019. And to make a long story short, I had been a fan of Scott's for years, didn't know him at all,
Hmm.
but I thought, well, if there's one person that I would love to narrate all of my books from now until eternity, it would be Scott. And I saw that he was an entrepreneur and his ahead of the game, was already working with some indie authors at that point. And so I contacted his amazing, um, you know, production manager, Gina Smith, and reached out and asked if he'd be interested. And through a process that we went through, we ended up doing a 3-book deal, and then it led on to later books. So that's sort of how we got together on.
Well, I love the fact that you've continued to have Scott in your books. And so, Scott, tell us about. I imagine you had some collaboration after the surprise of finding out that he wrote a book about an audiobook narrator. Talk about the process of collaboration with Landon.
Of course, I will. I'd be happy to. But Landon, I just want you to know, thank you for the kind words, but you've only got 50 minutes. I'll give you 50 more minutes to say good things about me. It's very kind. Thank you. This was a marvelous surprise. Landon and I got to know one another through letters, through emails, cards that we would exchange, and found out that we're both huge fans of old Hollywood. You probably can't tell that I love old Hollywood because of the books behind me. And at one point, I guess when he had this idea, he asked if he could maybe get some feedback. Essentially, it was like an interview. He wanted to interview me about how audiobooks are made. And I remember him saying that he had this idea in very broad terms. I wasn't really privy to what was going on in the story. I just told him about the process. And about 6 months later, he goes, "Oh, by the way, here you go." And I went, "Holy shit! Okay, well, I guess you did it." People say they're going to do things all the time. It doesn't always happen. And then he asked me to read it ahead of time, and just give him feedback. I mean, he was talking about like the rules that we break. There's one thing about the audiobook industry. It's very gender and ethnicity centric. Right. If a black man writes a book, they're going to hire a black man to narrate it. The same thing. People ask me why I work so much. I'm like, well, there's a lot of old white guys writing books, right? And in the book, at the very beginning, is the audio awards, and Billy D. Williams has his memoir come out, and there's a woman who is nominated for Best Narrator of the Year for having done that book. And I was like, "Hey, Landon, I'm sorry to tell you, but they would hire a guy to do that." And I just love the fact that the way that he addressed it was just talking about the elephant in the room. He said, at one point, Billy D. Williams says, "You telling me that girl, that woman can't read my book? Are you kidding me?" And it just addressed the issue and then move on. It was the collaboration, for lack of a better word. I was just primarily giving feedback like that, as well as just that first interview. I remember days before the book was coming out, he asked me, he emailed real quick and said, "Is it appropriate to say I hit the record button? Is there an actual button that you hit in the studio?" And I said, "Well, no, not really. I mean, I'm not using hardware, I'm using software. So I have a shortcut. I hit the number 3 button on my, on my keyboard." And he goes, "But do you use that terminology? I hit the record button." I said, "No, I typically say I hit record." "Okay, great." And that's what came about. And they're small things, but Dan Musselman, who's one of my favorite people of all time, he gave me my career basically, and he always said, most books are 100,000 words long. You could get 99,999 of them right, but if you pronounce one of them wrong, it will ruin the experience for the listener. And this is a similar thing, if you get the terminology wrong, it would take some
absolutely.
of us right out of the experience.
Well, absolutely. And I was just mentioning before when I was speaking to Landon, how at home I felt with everything, and everything was like it was familiar to me. It was at home, like you grabbed a cup of tea, for your throat, and right. You're at the award ceremony, and it really all of it just was so comfortable and just so wonderful and amazing, and I can't say enough good words about it. But I imagine that this was a little more, I guess, how shall I say, collaborative than most audiobooks. Like, Scott, talk a little bit about the process when you're hired to narrate an audiobook, and how much interaction are you having with the author, or what does that look like?
It all depends on whether you're working directly with the author or through a publisher. Publishers really like to curate the relationship, for lack of a better word. They like to limit the amount that you really get to interact with the author. Then again, I have authors I worked with for 20 years, and it's like there's no way we're not going to talk about it. I'm like, okay, he's coming over to my house for dinner. Am I not supposed to talk to him about his book? And if it's a Dune book, I've done all of those. I think 25 of them now. I call the author, and we go over all the pronunciations for the made-up names, and phrases, and whatnot. That's typically, what will happen. I'll reach out to Nelson DeMille. He puts in real people's names in the books that he writes, because they've made charitable donations. And I want to make sure that is it Carnes or is it Kearns? They deserve to have their name said right. That's typically the way it works with an author. But when you work directly with an author, like I've been blessed to do with Landon, he'll tell me, this thriller was inspired by this movie. And he even sent me a copy of it on DVD. I'm blanking on it now. The Gene Hackman film. Why am I blanking? That's it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I watched that the night before, and it's really, it just helps get you into the mood. If anything else, the relationship that I've had, this working relationship with Landon, which is thankfully for me become a true friendship, has informed my work on his books. It's nice to know, when he sends me an email saying, I got this character, I was inspired by this film, by this actress, by this actor. It's really nice to know that kind of thing. Nobody listening will realize, oh, yeah, that was Gene Hackman who inspired that character.
Sure.
And yet I know. And it makes it different for me, and hopefully more layered and textured for the listener.
So I guess my question would be: is when you take on a character, right? You fully envelop that character. Is that how do you prepare for that? And also, I'd like to ask Landon: was it a surprise when Scott interpreted the character in the way that he did? Was there anything surprising?
I kind of want him to answer first.
Yeah, sure. I can. So for this one, and you read it ahead of time, Anne, which was wonderful of you to do that. Because I wrote this in first person present tense, I felt that I had to know Sean Frost better than any character that I've ever written before. And I am not exaggerating here. I spent months working on Sean. I have 60 or so handwritten, two-sided, loose-leaf pieces of paper with notes about Sean Frost, his backstory, where he was raised, the toys that he played with when he was young, millions of things that we'll never get into the book. And a lot of that was inspired by a book that had come out just recently, Character by Robert McKee. And it can be really intimidating to go through his books, but they're so worth it because the journey he takes you through, and he asks the hard questions. And so
Yeah.
I told Scott this beforehand. I said my biggest fear when the book was to come out was that someone would get to a place like he said, if you get one word wrong, like he was talking about
Sure.
with Dan,
Yeah.
is that someone would say Sean Frost would never say that,
Mm-hmm.
or Sean Frost would
Right.
never do that,
Mm-hmm.
and that's scary and intimidating because you don't want something to take the reader or listener out of the experience. And
Sure.
so I felt comfortable after putting all that work in that I knew who he was, at least to start writing about him. And to add into the research before I say about Scott's interpretation of Sean, one thing that our relationship has developed far enough along where we're comfortable sending each other things and
Mm-hmm.
suggestions. And so this has a lot of pop cultural references, but it also has some really kind of, I always have a soundtrack for all of my books. And it's, songs that inspired me while I was writing. And if someone listened to all of those, they'd say, how in the heck did you get narrator out of all of those? Or the nonfiction books that I read. But there's something about it that I know as Scott as a performer, as an actor, they're hungry for information and let me see what I can do with this. And it's always on, I always kind of say a volunteer basis. He could use nothing that I give him and we'd be completely fine. But because we're friends and we've had exchange of ideas, and in a lot of points in narrator that made it better, it was let's let the best idea win here. No matter who came up with it. And so I was happy to go along with that. But I sent him an email for narrator that was just massive, but it had every single pop cultural reference in narrator. And there are points where, as you know, Sean acts them out in his mind and he's thinking about them. And so I thought, well, what if I sent those to Scott ahead of time? And so when he got to that part in
What
the
a
book,
gift,
he
right?
could look at that and work into the scene. And like he said, no one else would know that he watched Michael Douglas yelling to Sean Penn in the game before he actually acted that out. But, it keeps things fresh and, energetic. And so that's what I would say about his performance is that, oh my gosh, I mean, just delighted. And I don't know a ton about the industry, but the respect that I gained in the year to year and a half of research before I approached him, I'm surprised I kept it a secret that long, but I was so intimidated before going because I wanted to make sure that I had done my job. But what I did realize is that there are interpretations and decisions he's making, creative choices of taking that character on, sometimes in every line or every word with, what you're going to stress and whatnot that I never noticed before. I always say that Scott and other wonderful performers, they make it seem easy where, oh, I'm just listening to this great audiobook. I'm completely in there. But the decisions that you have to make to have that come alive. So yeah, absolutely. To see that hard work pay off and to see the directions that Scott took it as an artist and creator in his own right were just, I couldn't be happier.
That's awesome. So Scott, tell us a little bit about the process, about how you got yourself into character.
It's so funny because, in acting circles, you're either method or you're not, right? Maybe you're more of a technique actor. God, what's that great line by Spencer Tracy? His approach to acting was memorize his lines, don't bump into the furniture. I'm not a method actor, and yet I really like to prepare my mood. I think we have to prepare the text, make sure everything is pronounced correctly. I have a researcher who handles that for me, but I want to make sure that my head is in the right space. So I will watch that Night Moves, the Gene Hackman film. Before narrator, I watched Misery because there are similarities. Somebody who's been being held against their will and forced to make this, to create, basically. What I find really interesting is as I'm going through all the pop culture references that Landon sends me, is sometimes I find some that really work elsewhere. For instance, he was talking about this, and as you heard in the preview, this character Nehemiah Stone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a character who was very much, I think, in the same vein as Jack Reacher. And I'm also blessed to work on that series. I've got them all right up there, just right behind me. And Landon emailed me and said, while writing this part of the book, I was listening to the theme from The Incredible Hulk in the 1970s, The Lonely Man, that marvelous piano music at the end. It's heartbreaking. That actually used to be my ringtone on my phone, but it was so silent that I couldn't hear my phone ring, so I had to change it. But now, a month or two after I did narrator, I did the most recent Jack Reacher novel, which was called No Plan B. And I watched that video. I listened to that music every day before getting started. And nobody who's listening to either narrator or a Jack Reacher novel is going to go, wow, sounds like he was listening to this, to the Incredible Hulk theme. But audiobooks is a type of storytelling where subtlety plays. And if it affects my performance just in a little way, then wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, and I felt that absolutely while listening to it. So many subtle, tiny things that really I felt close from the beginning, really, to the character, which I thought was just phenomenal. So now I imagine that because you guys had so much correspondence back and forth, Scott, this is different for you in other books. Sometimes you don't have as much collaboration with the author, right? And so then, what other things do you have to do to prepare? Are you as you mentioned, some of your publishers don't necessarily want you to collaborate so much. So what do you do to prepare for those characters and for those books?
I have a real keen sense for genre. I love certain genres that I work in simply because I'm a book fan. That's the reason I got into this industry. I'll give you an example. I was working with Penguin Random House and the estate of Raymond Chandler, and his family wanted the whole, Philip Marlowe omnibus re-recorded, and they wanted to add music, and so they were looking for a new voice for Philip Marlowe, and they hired me. Now, sadly, Chandler passed away, and I want to say it was the late 50s, early 60s. There was no way I was going to be able to have any interaction with him other than reading books that he wrote about writing. So what I did is every single night, there were 8 books, 7 novels, and 1 book of short stories. We recorded them over the course of a year, and every single night, the night before I would record, I would watch, maybe it was The Big Sleep, an actual Philip Marlowe, story. Maybe it was Double Indemnity, but I was watching film noir constantly, just to put myself in that mood, in that mindset, that, hard-boiled detective meeting the femme fatale. Sometimes that's all you got. I've done that while doing horror novels. I've watched Shining the night before, or The Ring. I've done the same thing with when I was recording Somewhere in Time. I watch time travel romances just to put myself in the right mood.
And if I could add something about the character and what Scott was able to bring to the table. I was asked in a recent interview, how did you pick Scott to do this? And I said that even if I would have had 5 different narrators before writing narrator, I said, of course, I would have gone after Scott because I knew it was first person present tense, but also it's so much in the mind of Sean Frost. And when I've listened to Scott's work where he does first person, one, if you identify with that character, at some point you're listening and you think, I'm that character, I'm going through this, which is, a wonder of fiction. But also, too, you become immediately immersed in the narrative and the novel.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Scott is great at that. It's kind of what they said about Tom Hanks when they picked him for Robert Langdon.
Yeah.
Is that they thought that without speaking, he is a fantastic actor of someone who's thinking. And, less is more. And I like to think of Scott in those terms of when someone is speaking inside of their head, and that internal monologue was a natural choice. And the caveat that we joke about is that, Scott is not Sean Frost, but I thought he was perfectly suited to play that role. Like, and some people have asked me, they're like, Scott is Sean Frost. I'm like, no, he's not. I said,
I was going to say, do you identify? Yeah.
Well,
because he's a conglomeration of all the narrators that I researched. All their methods and stuff are kind of melded into this one character. So yes, there is some of Scott that is in there, definitely. But some of the routines that Sean have are completely different than what Scott.
It's the funniest part for me.
Well, that's kind of good in a way.
all of my colleagues, all the narrators who've gotten back to me and said, I loved, I loved this book. They don't ask about the substance abuse issues. They don't ask about anything like that. What they want to know is, do you really make as much money as Sean Frost does?
Oh my gosh.
And I, of course, say, yes, I do. Even though I don't.
Well, Landon, I wanted to say, the first person, writing a novel in the first person, I thought was just it just really, for this novel, I just thought it was really wonderful. Again, like you said, you picked Scott because you thought for him to do it in the character in first person was just, I think, a phenomenal choice. But is that a choice as an author? Yeah, is that a choice as an author? Like, okay, when you sit down, you've got an idea to start writing. Like, what makes you decide whether it's first person or how you're going to present that?
Well, for this particular case, this is the first time that I've ever written first person. Scott knows from my other books they've been third person close, third person omniscient. But coming up in getting ready to write this book, a lot of it had to do with the fact that I'm trying to dramatize and make a psychological thriller about someone who stays in a really confined space in a booth. And I empathize with that in terms of an author. I mean, I'm in my office right now, and for 12 hours a day, it's really, really boring and lonely and hard work. And that's why I look forward to these calls, to see my buddy here, because we need this as creators to touch base with each other every once in a while. And I always leave energized and enthused. But I thought, it's got to be a psychological thriller. That's the route to go with making this, so that I can bring in suspense and, reliable narration, unreliable narration. And it opens up a different menu of things to, play with the audience's mind and wonder what's real and get as many reversals, authentic reversals, not just cursory ones, as we can throughout the entire book to keep people on the edge of their seats. So I thought for this one, I had to go all in on this one character. And I mean, I say this a bit tongue in cheek, but not, I miss him. I miss writing Sean. I really do for that one intense period. Yeah. And I think Scott would agree that when we got to the actual recording, I mean, it was like we were living in the same house next door to each other, because it was, and then it breaks away and you go months without talking to someone, but that was so intense, and we had to collaborate and work on a few issues that it was, I don't know, it's like nothing I've never experienced before.
Also, just from my perspective, what it allowed me to do was, I don't want to use the word improvisation, because this is a book, it's written, it is scripted. And yet there are those moments where you can improvise in terms of your performance, not change the words, but well, he asked me about my own particular method of recording it. And for many years, I've used a tally clicker. And I can demonstrate to you, it's one of those things that you click when you're going in and out of a venue. You see the guy who's counting heads, how many people do we have inside now? Okay, it's technically called a tally clicker. But when I just use the words tally clicker, people always say to me, what? And I'm like, well, so I have to explain that, right, exactly, there you go.
Got one right here.
anything that makes the
There it
noise,
is.
anything that will spike the waveform.
Yep.
Okay, well, it's one thing to hear about it, and then it's another thing to actually hear it. So I reached out to Landon. I was like, how about, because this happens at the very beginning, as I'm talking about the tally clicker, how about I leave one of them in? And I had to call my edit house, my post house, to say, I want all of them taken out except that one, because it's the one that illustrates. You know, as I'm talking about the tally clicker, I just went up to the microphone and just hit it 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. That'll help. It'll help the listener. There was 4 or 5 things like that, and I would always email. I would always email Landon and say, "Is it okay if I put this in?" At one point, I'm literally dabbing my lip balm on. He talks to me, it was Sean.
Yep.
He's like, he's squishing his mouth with water. I left it in.
Yep.
Why not?
It was so perfect.
I was at home.
It was like special effects for a few parts, but it was those kind of layers that I think made this special, in my opinion, especially the time that he goes through Sean's routine, because he goes through it a few times, but Scott picked the perfect moment because it's right at the climax.
Yeah.
And here he is, triumphant from, let's just say, some obstacles that he's had to climb over. And, he's like, I dab this and you can hear it. And then I take a swig of water and you can hear it. And I'm like, I heard that and I'm like, that is so perfect. I never even would have thought of that.
I am in the booth.
I was there.
Yes.
It changes.
Right there.
You change the shape of your lips. It changes the sound coming out of it. And I was like, darn right. And people were asking, my buddies were asking me, were you just like dabbing it with your finger? Hell no. I was using blood steps.
Oh my God.
Michelle Cobb, who was texting Scott back and forth and who was emailing me, and she was talking about it on the podcast, and she's just, having a blast with the whole concept of Sean Frost. And she's like, Scott, he's in a tuxedo. But I said, the character that he was narrating in this book, listen to me, and so I said, well, let's let Sean, as a professional, get into a little bit of method and do that. And so, I'm glad that some people, liked those moments and found them entertaining and humorous. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So, is there a movie in the future? I don't know.
I tell you what, I would absolutely love to see this made. I think,
right?
And I was a screenwriter before I was a novelist. And that's where my degree is in. My master's is in screenwriting, and so a lot of this, when I got to the end of it, I said, "Gosh, I can see it."
Yep.
So fingers crossed. And
hey,
anybody listening to this podcast, please reach out to Scott and myself.
Yeah. Fantastic. So I asked that, but what's in the future for you next, Landon? Another book? What's happening?
Yeah, so I'm in the final editing stages of a murder mystery, and that's going to come out a month from now, right around Christmas. And I just found this out the other day, that the first book in the series, Huron Breeze, for the bestthrillerbooks.com, won Mystery of the Year for 2022.
Ooh,
so
congrats.
I'm just excited, humbled, surprised, but it's going to be neat to release a sequel when all of that gets shared. And so what Scott and I have talked about is that at some point we'll do our pre-recording conference for Huron Nights, because we're going to take the main character into a complicated place because it's part of a trilogy. So usually this is kind of the Empire Strikes Back episode of a trilogy, where everything goes to hell and then they've got to come back in the third one. So I look forward to that, and I have some interesting ideas of some things that might inspire him as he gets ready for his performance. And then I'm collaborating too with Suzanne Elise Freeman on a novella, which is going to take place in between books 2 and 3. And it's going to be an assassination, spy, espionage short. And so we've already talked over Zoom, and I'm thrilled to be working with her. She's going to, of course, play the main character in this one. And then we'll wrap up this trilogy with Huron Sunrise. And then finally, I'm going to get to the end of the Great Lakes saga, which is book 5 in that saga. I have a book on every Great Lake, and so I have 4 of them, but the last one has taken a back seat just because once a narrator got into my mind, I mean, the seas parted, and it was all I had to get that out. And then, of course, the mystery, that's kind of taken on its own life. It was only planned as a standalone, but so many fans liked it and wanted more. I was like, well, I'll have to think about it. I did not plan to write any more about that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
Well, count me as one of
busy year
those.
coming up.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like so much fun.
It is.
All your projects coming up. Yes,
You know
Scott.
what I love about it is that when we were doing the first book in that series, here on Breeze, and there's this moment where there's a book within a book, right? There's a woman writer at the center of it, and she has written this wildly successful book, and they talk about how the audiobook was narrated by Susanna Elise Freeman, my girlfriend. And and there was like a line or two in it that she actually says. And I said to Landon, you want me to have her come down to the booth and just have her say that? And so we had her do the opening credits too. So, her voice wouldn't come as a surprise. And then Landon gets this idea that like, oh, maybe I'll write the book within the book. And so he's having Suzanne narrate it. I just love it. It's, it's become a cliche to talk about thinking outside the box, but that's where growth comes from. That's where industry norms become stretched and we expand and grow. And I just love the fact that he is open to, great, let's do something a little different.
Well, I have to tell you, I mean, I'm not an audiobook narrator. I've narrated one a long time ago, but I'll tell you what, you guys just make it sound so wonderful and delightful that bosses out there, I'll tell you, you guys are inspirational. And I really, really appreciate you talking to us today. And I had all these questions, but the whole conversation, I just love the direction it took. And I appreciate it.
And I was going to have
so
to
much.
cut you off from saying nice things anyway. Another 15 minutes. That's it.
Well, Scott, tell us outside of working with Landon, is there anything else going on in your future that you'd like to let the bosses know about? Any other exciting projects?
I've got some wonderful books I've been working on recently. Just finished a historical thriller. It's nonfiction, but it was about the plot to kill Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin at the conference in Tehran. The first of the 2 times that the 3 of them met during World War II, the Nazi, it's called the Nazi Conspiracy. And that was really just a brilliant book. I'm also working on a project that, a couple of podcasting projects, scripted podcasts about the history of LA, the history of the entertainment industry. You can tell from the books behind me, I love the silent film era, and I have an idea that I would love to just share with anybody who's like-minded and fascinated by that era.
Oh, I'm already intrigued by that. I think that sounds like a fabulous idea.
Awesome.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. So, tell the bosses how they can get the narrator and any other book. Landon, where is it available? At Amazon? On your website? Where can they go to find out more?
So there's links to all of my books on my website, landonbeachbooks.com. But the Kindle version is exclusively on Amazon. But the paperback you can get at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, anywhere pretty much. And the audiobooks are wide. So anywhere that audiobooks are sold, you can get a copy of Narrator in 30 seconds.
Fantastic. Yes, like me. So any last, I'm going to say, tips for the bosses out there, for them to be bosses and be successful in their voiceover endeavors or their writing endeavors?
I would say, from my perspective, don't be afraid to reach out to the author, because you never know what can happen because of it. Be willing to do something that you might not ordinarily do in the booth. Years ago, there was a book I was doing where one character had an entire package of chewing gum we watered in his cheek. And it actually spoke about how it changed the sound of his voice. And I knew it wouldn't sound right if I was just doing this. So I reached out and I said, would it be okay if I record all those lines separate and they get edited in later? I checked with the editor, with the publisher, and I recorded the whole freaking thing with a wad of chewing gum in my mouth. And never in my life before or since have I brought chewing gum into a booth. But that was the time it seemed appropriate. So dare to think differently.
Yeah. And that makes the difference. Landon?
So I would say an idea that you might want to consider. I know that a lot of audiobook narrators, they will put some of their background and their history of what they did before they became an audiobook narrator, but I would encourage them to list as many things as they were involved in before, because you never know if an author is writing about a specific subject. We can use narrator as an example. Yeah. But of course, I was looking for someone who had not only audiobook narrating experience, but performing arts experience, which is another reason it worked out perfectly, to go with Scott on this. But maybe there is an opportunity of, I don't know, if you were a trucker or something else before you became a narrator, that you might be able to lend a unique experience and voice to that project in a realm that you're already really well versed in with audiobooks. So I would say, not to run away from your previous background. It might lead to an interesting book that you're a part of. And the other part is just that, yes, there are some authors, and I can say this, they don't really want to have a relationship. They're like, I did this, the narrator doesn't exist without me because I wrote the book. And, obviously those are not going to be the kind of relationships that would work out like Scott. But with us, there might be an opportunity to really have a unique kind of collaborative environment, not like a total collaboration, which we've said, which is, I have my turf and he has his, but there could be something that you did not know or expect. I never saw this coming until we became friends, and I really can't see narrator without it now, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
Absolutely does. Well, gentlemen, it has been such a joy talking to both of you. Thank you so, so much for your words of wisdom and inspiration. And bosses, go get narrator. I'm telling you, go out and get it now. In less than 10 seconds, you can click and have this experience for yourselves. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm going to give a great big shout out to our sponsor, IPDTL. You too can connect and work like bosses. Find out more at ipdtl.com. You guys have an amazing week, and I'll see you next week. Bye.